Hello, my name is Lena Harmony Vassor, and I am part of Group 5 of my General Biology Lab class. And our topic is Week 1, which is the scientific method. Now, what is the scientific method and why is it important? Those go hand in hand, okay? Hand in hand. So, what is the scientific method? Well, the scientific method is basically a step-by-step system that allows us to ask a question and follow a very structured and a well thought out, I will say method, you can't define it using the word, a very thought out way of exploring ideas. And why is it important? Because it standardizes the way tests are carried out and how they are done. You might be like, that doesn't sound very important. Let me explain it to you. Because if I want to find out something and I'm thinking with my own mind by myself, because you have to understand that the scientific method has been used for years by many, and it has been expanded on, condensed, explored, discussed, and it is currently the best and only proper method we have to actually do the process of learning new material properly when we have a question. And almost all of the theories and everything that we have in science have been used and explored using the scientific method, like gravity, like friction, like cleanliness with soap, what soaps to use and how to use them, different chemicals, what they do, how it affects our body. All that was explored using the scientific method from a simple observation. Now you might be like, oh my gosh, that's so fantastic, but what are the steps? Let me tell you the steps. So there is like a little bit of discussion of what the actual steps are, but I'm gonna use the 7 because it has this extra bonus one that biology majors should be mindful of, even though I am a psychology major. Yep. So the first step is question. Like, what do you observe and what are you questioning? Now we're gonna have an example after this. Research. Now look into that topic. Has somebody already studied this so you could save your time and not need to do the rest of these steps? Or did somebody study this and you still curious about, is this correct? I think I could do that better. And all this different stuff. Like, research allows you to better narrow in what you are looking at and what you are actually questioning and observing. Because we just started our experiment from our observation, our experiment will be very broad and wide, and research help narrows that in. Next is the hypothesis. This is our if-then statements. If such and such happened, then such and such happens. And this is like a question. And then our fun part, the experiment, step 4. There's 3 more, but it's step 4. And there's a lot of parts to this. Now, our experiment is composed of controls, the independent variable, the dependent variable. Now, what is the independent variable? The independent variable is the variable that you are purposefully changing, and the dependent variable is the variable that changes because the independent variable changes. That sounded confusing, I know. We'll get an example after this. And you'll need controls, so where the independent variable doesn't change, so you can see a baseline of how things work in a control group, is that control I was describing. But like an actual control, like just control alone without the group added after it, a control is like all the things you are keeping consistent across the board. Data analysis. So after you do your experiment, fantastic, but you just got raw data. Like, what does this mean? So you would analyze the data, look at the numbers, crunch the numbers, do some math, have some fun with it. And then you do your conclusion. You say, did you fail to reject the null hypothesis, or did you accept the null hypothesis? What is the null hypothesis? So we said the hypothesis is an if-then statement. However, the null is the same but different. The null is basically saying, if such and such happen, then such and such won't happen. There will be no happenings. The independent will have zero effect on the dependent variable. That means it doesn't matter if it's positive effect, negative effect. There is no effect happening with the dependent variable and the independent variable. Nothing's going on, okay? Nothing's going on. And then the last step that I would mention, that's not really a step, but we'll include it anyway, is communication. This is our peer reviews. This is us writing a report and sending it to another scientist to look at so they could do our experiment too and be like, he, you're right or you're wrong. This need to change or that need to stay the same. Like, it's you buddying up, because you know what they say, two minds are better than one, okay? Now let's do an example. Now, let's say I'm learning how to shave. I had never been taught how to shave. I'm learning from YouTube, and people are saying to use a men's razor. I'm like, why? So I do a little bit of research, and I find out that men's razors have a closer shave. I'm like, but why do they have a closer shave? And then I find out men have testosterone, and testosterone tends to lead to thicker and coarser hair growth. I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't know that. And then I'm here thinking, like, is this like a gimmick that companies are using with these razors? Because, like, why would you make a woman's razor weaker? Even though it had, like, men, like, it's understandable why men razors will be stronger, but why would you make a woman's own weaker? That doesn't make sense to me. So what you would do is create a hypothesis saying, maybe, like, if I use a men's razor, then I will get a closer shave. You already observed the video, you already did your research, you did your hypothesis, and next thing you need to do is do your experiment. Now, doing the experiment is also including planning the experiment. So I have to plan what razors I'm going to use. So for example, I'll use the Venus, which is a woman's razor, Bic, which is a men's razor, and the Dis, which is a unisex razor. You see that all of them are disposable. This is part of my control. I would only use disposable razors to keep it fair. Because if I use a metal high-end men's razor and a disposable woman's razor, then that's another variable that could be affecting the dependent variable. Now, other controls I could have is like the species. So am I using Homo sapiens? Like, am I using people? I could have an equal group of men, like different groups. So like men, women, people with alopecia. Actually, I won't include them because they don't got hair. That makes no sense. But you have to be very thoughtful and wise, and you have to figure out your independent. So my independent is, what type of disposable razor? Is it a men's? Is it a woman? Like, and then the dependent is the speed of hair growth. Of course, I can't measure the closeness of shave with the current materials that I have present. So I would measure how quick it takes for the hair to grow back to the state it was prior to being shaven, because that can be easily measured with a picture. Because when doing my research, I saw that the closer shave you get, the longer it takes for it to grow, because it's lower down, so it has to get farther to get back to that original point. Make sense? Yeah. So then I would chop up the numbers, do the analysis. I'd be like, oh my goodness, and maybe the woman's razor is better. So in my conclusion, I would say that I failed to reject the null. Even if it was opposing to my hypothesis, I would still fail to reject the null. And then I would write this up in my report, send it off to my buddies who are also in the scientific field, and they would check it out themselves. I would be like, oh wow, fantastic. So let's do a quick review. So 1, What is the scientific method and why is it important? It's the standardized steps that allow scientists to follow a very structured and very equal plane of figuring out questions that they have about life and the world and practically anything. What are the steps? The steps are, one second. The steps are question, research, hypothesize. In the hypothesis, you also create your null, experiment, data analysis, conclusion, and you could add that little communication as your bonus. It's not really included, but you know, I'll include it. I'll add it. And our example, razors, women's, men's, which one's better? Let's throw in a little control group who will only use the disposable unisex razors that has one blade. Like, is that closer? Is that better? These both have the same amount of blades, so they're pretty equal. Only thing is, one is advertised for women and one is advertised for biological men. And capiche? That's the scientific method, folks.